Boeing is the biggest aerospace corporation on Earth and the best known one. If you ever traveled by air, there is an extremely high chance that you flew on Boeing 737 at least once, since it's the most popular airliner ever created. There are over 10,000 built, around 1,000 in the air at every given moment. Every 5.5 seconds, one 737 takes off or lands. The company recently celebrated its 100th birthday and is listed 24th in the US by the revenue. It's involved in relationships with businesses and governments, with over 20% of their revenue coming from military orders. Boeing, while having a huge brand recognition, hardly has any specific traits. It's an American corporation through and through, mildly diversified, big, and heavily entrenched in economic and political systems of both country and the whole world alike. The company has been founded in 1916 by William Boeing, the wood merchant. Throughout its history, Boeing's development and evolution are best characterized as opportunistic. Aerospace industry was born not long before the company itself, so the latter had to go through all growing pains of the former, find solutions, shape the regulations. So, when it's almost impossible to describe and identify Boeing from the design point of view, it can be done through describing its integration and influence in three areas: society, economics, and politics. If it wasn't for jet airliners, traveling would be much slower and less affordable, and modern global society simply couldn't exist. First Boeing's jetliner 707 wasn't built until mid-50s, when there were already other jet passenger planes in use. But Boeing still considered 707 a risky investment. And in fact, US Army, not the civil aviation, has been considered as the main customer for this model. The case is that the jetliners were new and had a little bit of bad reputation, thanks to the Havilland comet that crashed multiple times in its short lifetime. People, and therefore airline companies, were cautious about them. But the flow of people grew, and airlines, who are always highly competitive, had to make moves. One particular event helped jet airliners a lot. Eisenhower, who just became President of the United States, decided to show off a little bit and went on tour, during which he visited 11 countries in 19 days, a thing unheard of in a pre-jet era.
Folks, thank you very much indeed for coming out on this cold night to welcome my party and me back home. It's certainly good to be here. Now, I must remind you that this morning we had breakfast in Madrid, lunch in Casablanca, and now we are home at an hour which, by our getting up time, was 5 or 6 o'clock in the morning. So you can realize that this is not a time for a very erudite and informing speech.
The particular model that brought Eisenhower and a lot of presidents after him around the globe was nothing other than Boeing 707, that later became the first official permanent Air Force One. With the jetliners becoming mainstream, the number of people traveling via air grew exponentially. In the era of piston airplanes, a lot of people still resorted to traveling by boats, and now all of them, and some extra, headed towards airports. It was a huge challenge for the latter. Jetliners not only brought much more people to the airports, they also require much longer runways and are much noisier. So the architects and urban planners had to step up as well. The next rather huge leap in passenger transportation was done by Boeing in late 1960s, and this time the change came by a direct order of the airlines. They desperately needed bigger aircraft. While planes became slightly larger by that time, it wasn't enough. Pan American Airlines approached Boeing and asked to create a plane that will have room for double the number of people 707 can hold. Pan Am president Juan Trippe even had his own vision of how the plane should look like. Two 707 decks, one on top of the other. But Boeing's Joe Sutter, who was appointed as a project manager, had another idea. stacking the decks side by side. So, the iconic 747, the first ever wide-body jet, was born. It allowed more comfortable travel on longer distances and, once again, challenged the airport architects. Though 747 didn't look like Pan Am thought it will, it still received a small second deck which housed a business class lounge and a cockpit. It allowed front loading on a cargo version of the airplane, and cargo version was extremely important in this project. The whole world expected the new transportation revolution, the one that will render all pre-existed passenger planes obsolete, the supersonic transport revolution. In 1970, when USSR and Europe already had their Concorde and Tupolev 144 up and running, Boeing, who won government contest for the best SST, was struggling with its ambitious project. Boeing 2707 had to carry 300 people on the speed 3 times higher than the speed of sound. America had to confirm its technological supremacy. But the project went way over its budget, and it soon became clear that, after all, SSTs are not the future. Both Concorde and Tupolev 144 were extremely expensive to build and to maintain, required enormous runaways, and terrorized everyone with their infamous sonic booms. In 1972, government stopped funding the program, and it caused so-called Boeing bust. At that time, Seattle has been pretty much built around Boeing. 2707 cancellation caused the company to fire 60,000 people in 2 years and move their headquarters to Chicago, which offered better tax deal. If it wasn't for the port and a lot of now unemployed, well-educated citizens, Seattle right now could be in a state very similar to Detroit. But the city survived, and during the nationwide crisis in 70s did better than an average American city. Later, it was nicknamed Silicon Forest, for a lot of companies from the surging IT industry made it a new home. Seattle almost became a ghost town thanks to Boeing. But can the state put Boeing's business in jeopardy? It sure can. It's easy to explain Boeing's dependency on politics on recent proposals of President Trump. For example, a so-called wall tax on import to Mexico will set back both Boeing and their biggest customer to the south of the border, Aeromexico, which uses exclusively Boeing airliners. The situation is more severe with China, since Trump decided to go on trade war with the second biggest economy in the world. It might hugely affect Boeing's future, since the company estimates future China market for new airliners around $1 trillion. China takes up to 25% of all Boeing orders. While these are extreme examples, and in more modest and calm times, the risks coming from the political decisions are less. For a global company, hugely dependent on both export and import, it's vitally important to have some sort of influence in the political field. Boeing has a whole department solely for these purposes, Boeing Government Operations. Boeing is the number one defense company when it comes to lobbying. They spent over 22 million on it in 2015. Another nice handle is its 150,000 employees. In 2014, Boeing received a huge tax break from the government in order to maintain production and keep the workplaces. They basically pioneered lobbying in the defense industry, overturning the government's decision to scrap the space station project in 1991. That was scrapped later anyway, and were growing their influence in DC ever since. There is even a government structure nicknamed as Bank of Boeing. It's a credit agency designed to keep the economy going via credit injection. In 2000, banks' loans were going predominantly towards companies that were buying Boeing's airliners, reaching 82% of all given loans in 2012. Banks' questionable practices traditionally had partisan character. Democrats were defending it, Republicans criticized. Recently, Trump nominated Scott Garrett as a potential head of the institution, and apparently, He had strong ties with the Airbus in the past. Boeing is one of the companies that are so tightly incorporated in everything around, it's hard to tell what it will take for such company to go down at this point. While small, agile new companies can sometimes bite them, like Canadian Bombardier did, when built a plane Boeing doesn't have the answer to. It will take a million of such bites to take down the giant. While Boeing might look a little bit heavy footed, it eventually always finds the right direction to follow it then with all the might of the American nation.